Rooster strolled leisurely through the sun-drenched yard, dangling the comb on its side. Old Mongrel dozed in the shade. Lazily flies buzzed paladins. July the heat did not allow me to breathe freely. Stuffiness hung in hot layers over the village. Cook unfolded over the garden, wiped sweat from forehead. Fine, what did I do? All lit yesterday, before the onset of hell. Young woman, placing hand on forehead, looked towards the open gate. On the road, figures appeared. Frank quickly rubbed her hands on the hem and ran to the NASCAR house. After rinsing glowing face over the washstand, she set the table with deft movements. From the furnaces appeared 2 cast iron, big and smaller. A wooden painted bowl came out with juice of tomatoes, sprinkled with onions and generously flavored with homemade sour cream. I and village Stephanie lived together in the summer suffering. So customary, that for dinner the men came to one of the houses, women took turns feeding all the workers, and each tried to do his best to receive the title of the most hospitable hostess. Rebecca, just you, stretched out on the table. From under the sticks to the market with ice milk. Overheard discordant clatter and male voices. Rebecca, take a shift, a mustachioed gray-haired man boomed, placing a bag at the threshold. How please, Beauty Long Braid. Maria smiled and shook her head. How Mag 8, Mr. Bound, welcome. Following for the USA House 6 more men burst into the house in a crowd. One of them, young swarthy, stepped towards the cook and lovingly embraced her. Hello, a woman! The man looked at the table and nodded in surprise. Well, pour borscht, and then we'll figure it out. You run to Mrs. Jimenez, she asked. Rebecca, fast. I poured thick, fragrant borscht on plates, checked again, what is enough. Young woman ran out of the house and hurried down the street. Having reached the yard, Mrs. Jimenez, she first looked through the wattle fence not to guard her beloved grandmother's goose, very eager for other people's heels. Birds were not in the yard, and Rebecca boldly opened the gate. Grandma, you didn't call! The girl screamed loudly. Let's be quicker, I'm all fed today. The south wall of the White House she will throw out on a sprawling pear tree, under which the hostess sat at a round table. Come on, barbarian, let me look at you. Mrs. Jimenez stretched out her hand towards Rebecca, and obediently came up and turned around in front of Grandma. Well, what here truth, up to my neck today. I dreamed. Barbarian, Mrs. Jimenez closed her eyes, you are sitting on the porch right here. Ronald comes to you with a bucket, fish splashing in the bucket. So here, you are pregnant, granddaughter boiled. Cheeks lit up crimson. Here nonsense. Baba, what's up here? Ronald with Fisher, then you can see. And Ronald, we with Brian already signed for a year, and you all Ronald you pass, everyone doesn't have it, perished. If pregnant, then so be it. Rebecca pursed her lips, I'll go, Grandma. Their men go, knocking with spoons, and can't find a frying pan. Very cold. Nala grandmother on the cheek and ran back towards the house. Mrs. Jimenez shook her head, crossed her granddaughter after. Rebecca gave birth hard and long. Hosted midwife childbirth. Because all the roads were covered with snow, the paramedic from the district center could not reach. On the night of February 29th were born Stephanie and Edward. Glancing at the children and exhaling happily, the new mom fell asleep. Anal throw on. Examined babies, counted fingers on tiny hands and feet, nodded satisfactorily. Fine kids. Children are really born strong. Yes, and gasped by you. Only just taking the first steps, brother and sister immediately began to explore a new territory for themselves at home. Rebecca just kept up with the fidgets. Stephanie smiled. Inseparable twins, although they were known as noble schoolchildren, but both did well in school, yes, and the housework was always in the wings. Years, as is known, fly unnoticed. Here in twins, already quite mature, were going to go to continue studying in the city. Everything wiped away tears. Brian looked at the children with pride. Well, a mouse, it's your responsibility. For you answer your sister with your head, senior. The father hugged the young man and patted him on the back. On 4 minutes, snorted Stephanie. Same. To me, senior from and has brother help. And hold on to each other in a foreign land, support him all. And then you and your family, understood? Brian looked at his daughter with mock severity. Understood by Mom, yes, stop it. After all, not on the moon flying away, all in the city. Stephanie gently hugged her mother and clung to her. A mouse, trying to look mature and calm, still couldn't resist this same jump to Rebecca, laying his head on her shoulder. Cook smiled. Whom tears Tio grandmother, do not forget to go before leaving. She, Mrs. Jimenez, traditionally sat at the table under a pear tree. Leaves the trees have already begun to turn yellow somewhere, felt soon and axes. The twins from both sides ran up to the great-grandmother and simultaneously hugged her. Mrs. Jimenez broke into a smile. And newspaper, don't forget your family. Write until come, and I will pray for you here. Day God, I'll wait for your arrival. Girl, stop, you will babysit our grandchildren. Stephanie loudly kissed her grandmother on the cheek. The guys settled firmly in the city. Stephanie learned to be a seamstress and got a job working in a modern dress workshop. Michael followed the path of his old hobby, completed his studies, and now worked as a cook in one of the catering establishments. And the guy's dreams were to someday become a chef in a decent restaurant on a holiday. Young people most often came to their native country to see Stephanie, parents to visit, she, Mrs. Jimenez, chat with former classmates who remained in the village. Years were leaving, like sand through your fingers. Performed new times. Stephanie became the mistress of her own fashion house, met a man and got married. Edward fulfilled his dream, become a gourmet restaurant chef. Twins raised their own children. Sister has 2 boys and brother has a daughter. Stephanie, come with mice on weekend. The alarmed voice of the mother in the telephone disturbed Stephanie. Babe, they are really bad, should have seen. Bro, sister already, maybe, half a year away from home. Walked down a familiar street. Bleached. Flying around the walls, pear, lonely pulling a bare branch to the sky. Under she still has the same chair, only she, Mrs. Jimenez, after him. No, Edward, sigh, did not have time. And the tables are set in the house, all the villagers gathered. Loot did not respect, were afraid, but loved. Now it was better in the village dressmaker. You windows old sewing machine without cover, something laid out on a drawing. Nom tables in the corner. The woman did not finish her last masterpiece, sorting through the folds of silk fabric, Stephanie said softly. With the death of a great-grandmother seemed to divide the family. Nobody and didn't think, what Mrs. Jimenez was the link that kept everyone strong. Twins visit the village less and less, although the accident is often called. For the most part one don't know what. Edward doesn't want to talk. Brian suffered severe pneumonia, after which somehow abruptly passed. He from a strong man suddenly turned into an old man. Mesh. Mother called, Dad is completely ill. You would talk to my wife, she is your chief doctor. Maybe you can put him in the hospital, examine and treat. Mother speaks, breathing in once, almost unable to speak while wheezing. Find out. Well, I do not know. Edward hesitated. Saint's bunk, always counting. Yes, and lead him so far. Edward, he is our dad, understands Stephanie, already mad at myself. What did you call? Knew after all, what Deborah holding his brother under his heel. He won't even ask her to make tea, not that there is something to gain for the father. Yes, well you. Cold, let's then throw off the money and put it in the paid ward. Because it's really hard. You already inventing, which ward they have a hospital in the district center, let them put it there. I don't understand at all, what is the problem? Edward immediately boiled. Yes, nothing is a problem, forget, Stephanie. Slammed the pipe on the headgear lever. Greedy fat boar, when it just became, she thought. Tomorrow I will call the paid clinic, and I will decide. Gone he brother me too. However, I did not have to decide anything that night. Brian died. Again autumn, depression again laid to mark the tables. Stephanie wearily sank into a chair. I and friends and relatives began to gather at home. From the invited rustle of voices for some reason gave me a headache. Woman got up and went to the residential part of the house. You bedroom, she slowed down, because of muffled voices were heard at the door. Ma'am, well, everything should be in order. How this lets then we'll talk. How Edward the First won't be, you won't get 100. Necessarily you now discuss the inheritance. Such days you don't seem to be in trouble. Stephanie opened the door. Yes, already, does not live in poverty. Ma'am, look, what kind of fad has grown Peter outside grasp, that the world is already dividing property with a living mother. I hear to upset yourself, little brother, you, maybe, do not know, but Dad rewrote the house for Mom, and he had nothing else. So roll up your lips. Stephanie, but why did you stretch the accident, not quarrel, please, after all, only the father was buried. Edward tanned, ran out of the room, then she didn't hug her mother who was walking in sobs. After commemoration, when everyone's gone, Stephanie stepped out onto the porch. She sadly looked at the native yard, in which they jokingly run children or schoolgirls. Or after all, they didn't spill a mountain for each other. Now what? When they moved away. Maybe it all started. When a mouse married Deborah, then at first she was delighted with such a sister-in-law. How about your fashion house? Stephanie was willing to help with the wedding dress, still a new family. But after the dress of the order from the daughter-in-law, a suit for work gushed like a river, evening cocktail dress, skirts, sundresses, coat. I not only for Deborah, and for Deborah's sisters, mothers, aunts, 8 native nieces. They could not stand the moment, and covered the shop with an iron hand. She made it clear, what is the maximum, what can she expect? This is tailoring without markup, i.e. materials and work. I sew, and will have to pay. Holy was hurt to the core. Demand money from relatives. Dozens of dresses already sewn for free and other clothes were immediately forgotten. Stephanie forever turned into mercantile rubbish. Stephanie felt someone's presence. Listen, Edward said softly, not looking at my sister, you do not understand. Sparkles. Problems at work, she was caught on no matter what. Now you have to pay a very large amount, otherwise she will go to court, and we have a daughter. To her somehow life must be built between. Stephanie looked at her brother in horror. You what, a body to inherit a what's next demand? Mom has money for your share, sell houses, evict her. You crazy, eh? What should I do here? What? We already collected everything, what do we have? Still not enough. A mom. I would take my mom. Her grandmother's house, it can also be sold. How many you need? Stephanie asked shortly. Edward called the amount. I met you on Monday. Yes, I have an apartment for the younger deferred, but nothing. You will write me a receipt for this, that you renounce your inheritance in the future. You understood that I wouldn't pull my handles to my parents' house. Edward nodded, smiling. Stephanie sighed and went into the house. Stephanie didn't know what's happening to the Edwards family. Bro completely stopped going to the village, only occasionally called his mother, was briefly interested in health and did not even listen to the answer, immediately responded with deeds and completed the dialogue. Stephanie continued to come to Rebecca, rather out of habit than necessary. Then after each trip she called her brother and briefly told her mother, then the connection, what happened to the twins, thinned out, turned pale, only a thin thread remained, which still did not allow communication to fade away completely. With of death Brian 1.5 years has passed. Stephanie drove up to the gate of the parental house and turned off the engine. She looked in surprise at the worldly wise man parked nearby. G-man. I dry sausages for you, your favorite broth and spices, as you asked? Stephanie put the bags of goodies on the floor and kicked off her shoes. Ma'am, where are you? Light in the kitchen at the set table sat a radiant Rebecca. Against some unfamiliar man settled her. Cook looked at her daughter and clasped her hands. Stephanie, why didn't you call? What are you going? Mother jumped up from the table. Man turned around. Stephanie could barely hold back a scream. Stranger, he looked a lot like his late father, but looked younger and a little brighter. That don't get acquainted, this is Ronald, he is your uncle. Hello, Stephanie. Man stood up and held out his hand to greet. Hello? How this is Uncle A. Why have I never heard of you? Stephanie, you sit down, I will slowly tell you everything. Hungry from the road. Maria was born in a distant Alaska town. Father military, mother nurse. Happy small family? When the girl was 15, parents died. Ridiculous and accident ended the lives of still very young people. Cook was left alone, heartbroken. From the south of the USA. Her father's great aunt came for her, analogues of gentle. She and took the girl, as the only known relative, living in Alaska all her life. Iron City Rebecca with amazement met the southern village you there. The heart was still longing for the dead parents, but the new reality distracted from grief. On the first village day Rebecca was sent with a can to a neighbor for milk. Stood frosty January. Mrs. Jimenez carefully wrapped Rebecca in a sheepskin coat and a scarf, brought from Alaska. Rebecca successfully got milk and hurried back. Behind screams and laughter were heard. Girl couldn't turn my head and look, what's happening? Warm a scarf and a thick sheepskin coat fettered the movements. Suddenly she felt like something hit her in the back. Followed by. She turned around with her whole body and immediately turned out two in the nose. Not standing on my feet, girl jumped on the road. Don't know flew off to the side, milk immediately absorbed the snow. Cook became very sad, embarrassing and hopelessly sad. She all alone in this wide world in the middle of an unfamiliar village, who met me so unfriendly. Girl sniffled and cried. Rebecca hit the child, burying face in mittens, heard, like no one ran up. But don't rave, you what milk spilled now still pour. Get up, let's go. The girl jerked to their feet and began to shake. She carefully moved the mitten to the side and imperceptibly looked. Flushed black-haired teenager with a concentrated look fought back and in sheepskin coat snow, and there was another one nearby. Very similar to the 1st of January. Removed her hands from her face. Aunt's milk it's raining took, young woman will swear. Don't worry now. Ted it's raining another pour. From let's go to. The boy pulled her by the sleeve, going the same way again. Girl accompanied by hooligans stayed at the house of Aunt Rebecca. Woman opened the door and immediately put her hands on her hips. You why no had she answered her with a light slap, and then looked at Rebecca. Her voice softened, and quote, why did you come back? Babe got lost too boys, pushing back and one, standing in front of a woman. We pour some more milk, accidentally. All in all, ran past and pushed. Her aunt's eyes widened and Cook swept sparks. An orphan offend. Brother you bastards. She looked at Rebecca again. Activities, babe, I will pour you milk, and you will warm up while taking off the bow, let it dry. Cook I didn't want to sit in a strange house with these hooligan boys at all, but politeness did not allow to refuse. She pulled off a scarf from her head and took off her sheepskin coat, attaching it to the trestle bed at the entrance. Oops, and I thought, you are very small, swarthy. The boy raised his eyebrows in surprise. I Ronald, and this is my brother Stiab to the older, muttered Brian. On 4 minutes older, shouted Ronald. A barbarian named Stephanie. So we met. I am your dad and your uncle. Stephanie looked suspiciously at Ronald. Very strange looks they exchanged. Dad. Now next why Ronald Uncle Ronald never mentioned why I am not me, think. Rebecca sighed. On the first evening Ronald once disturbed Rebecca. He asked everything in his life, wondering. Sympathy even mixed. Stiba took part in the conversation, as he frowned into a cup of tea and answered the rare questions addressed to him. At the end of winter Ronald Cook became inseparable. Between them they developed a close friendship, which each side is a little tormented with the suspense. Rebecca all the time I sat and thought, do you like Ronald? And he asked the same questions, does he like girls? Guys walked together and went to school, always the three of us, inseparable Ronald, Cook it and sullen, silent Brian. Unspokenness in relations between. Adolescence only added spice. Rebecca sometimes flirted a little with other guys, to see Ronald's reaction, and the guy in response even once invited a classmate for a walk, from whose accident roared for 2 days and did not go out, not wanting to meet the traitor Ronald. Young life boiled and seethed. School ended, an army loomed ahead. Late spring raged on the street. Ronald called Cook take a walk. In silence this time Edward did not accompany them. Volcom I have to go to the army. Ronald slowly walked next to the girl and thoughtfully looked in front of him. You wait, what else? Ronald turned abruptly and embraced the girl, covering her face with kisses. What's the same? That evening they finally confessed to each other their long-hidden feelings. I got my first, sweetest kiss. Rebecca promised to wait for Ronald and get ready for the wedding. Stephanie, open-mouthed, looked with her mother at the newly minted uncle. Here it's a turn. How is Dad? Stephanie even trembled with resentment for her beloved father. Ronald with Stipple went into the army together, and only Brian returned. He silently handed me a letter from Ronald, to whom he wrote here, that he is very sorry, that he met a new girl and fell in love with her. He said that he will marry her, and asked for forgiveness. Yes, what forgiveness? I couldn't breathe, I felt so bad. Haven't seen him in years, texted me every week, how he loves. Only silent for the last month and a half. We want to remember Black and I then all from melancholy. Brian, he waited a month for her, came to marry me. I loved talking to you, at first sight. Forget it, Ronald flew. When you can't forget, then look at me, we are the same person, almost twins. Ronald, who for all this time has not uttered almost a word, slammed his hand on the table. Now I will tell how it really was. After all, I didn't know what's up with Tepko in love with my Rebecca. He always was like that, a bit reclusive, and in the army he completely closed himself. From Barbarians I read the letter, smiling. Blacker than clouds loom nearby. I took a photo and look, he breaks down and leaves. At the end of the service we sent guards. Here he gave me, I boiled I love, until the heart is beating. Give in, concessions if you are my brother. I say, yes, how is the ledge if she is alive? I love her. Then she tells me, not live, understand? I can't live without her. Certainly, I almost punched him in the face then. Yield your favorite, it's like in General A. The next night I took it out of the loop. Barely managed. This week he was in the hospital. Case somehow hushed up, and I'd been thinking all this week, what should I do? Edward went out and started lightning again. Kidding if you don't understand, and laid out his stupid plan. In the village he rides alone, and after the service how I want, but not a foot to their native lands. Letter written, and then your mother told you. All these years I loved her so much. Stephanie. Want believe, like it or not. Families didn't start, they lived like beans. Only bow nis. I didn't write a letter, what I wanted to know. How there is mine Rebecca she infrequently, but still wrote, as if she smelled, that's not all, how Brian tells. But I didn't reveal the secret, afraid for my brother. Why haven't you heard of me? So our mother, Rebecca, died, you weren't there yet, and who else? Brianov children would not mention me. Yes, and forgot, maybe, overgrown with the past. Then the grandmother completely stopped writing to me. I am led through the 3 neighborhoods of the certificate. What do you throw on the dead? What Brian more strongly? And now at least the whole has come, though not immediately, but she came, that there is no more brother. Man extended his hand. Rebecca immediately put her in his palm. Tanechka, when he arrived, I couldn't even get angry. I remember him all my life, and I understand even if that story is with another girl. Is it true? And it seems. Oh, Mom, Stephanie, I did not notice that tears were running down her face. Here it was in the to-do folder. You only Edward didn't say anything. The bottom the sea looked anxiously at her daughter, feeling that it was not necessary. Gone 8 years. For many years Edward never showed up in his native village. Stephanie did go regularly, visiting mother and another found uncle. Barbarian as if rejuvenated next to a loved one. No matter how hard it was to admit, but Brian committed the worst sin, blackmailed people apart, destined for each other. At night 2 apartments Stephanie there was a sound, heart from something gook pounded chest. Woman picked up the phone. Stephanie. Ronald's voice, Ronald shivering. What such, Uncle Ronald, but she already understood what went wrong. No more of my market, said the man from the cloud. At the funeral, almost the whole village gathered. Stephanie stood at the grave, without feeling the tears streaming down your face. Here and the sun came, to see Rebecca for the first time in so many years. Ronald was silent at the head of the camp. They managed to exchange a few words, expressing support. "You don't think that you will get it all evil," whispered Light. "I saw. What kind of repairs did the mother-in-law in the house rebuild and make an extension? Receiving a broken spear is not worth it." Not rejoicing. Stephanie raised her eyes. Completely lost my mind. What joy! I bury my mother, I also bury my mother. Edward entered the conversation. Things still need to be discussed. Stephanie shook right over the coffin. Business to discuss. When my father was buried, at least you waited for the wake. What, you're itching again? You got scammed then, like a fool, taking advantage of that in a hopeless situation. I wanted to grab everything for a penny. The crowd began to whisper, "Which a shame." No one does not hesitate, already dividing property right above the mother's coffin. Ronald looked at Edward, caught his eye and shuddered. Still similar to Brian not going anywhere. Who else is this? Nodded towards Ronald. After you know, the man answered him, gently kissing Cook head on, and walked away. In commemoration, Edward found his sister and took her aside. Stephanie, you do anything, lose me, we have a family, problems, and I will enter into the inheritance. Understood. I consulted with a lawyer, he told me, something like a receipt in general, a Filkins letter. Want take to court, you still lose. Consulted a lawyer, when just managed, ghoul, go where you want, and it will only make me sick. My mom died, and now my brother is gone. That did not try to move away on the mesh, and kept. What the hell is this? He pointed to Ronald. What, he is the owner, this mother's husband, Edward. And he is in charge here, because this is his home. All I can't anymore, go away from me. Again the house is empty. Mentioning dispersed, only Edward from the world. This is not a family, and Ronald certainly. Everyone needs to talk, proclaimed Ronald. All sitting down, Ronald took out a folder of papers and began. Barbarian long thought, how do I do? She knew that Stephanie agreed with the brother at the investigation. He looked at Ronald expressively. But I was sure that here he would not keep his word and wanted to snatch a piece, so I decided to arrange everything in advance. So, the testament thing is rebuttable, but no deed. Rebecca gave all her property to her grandson. Room silence hung. How she gave it to her grandchildren woke up Deborah. Our Sharon didn't get anything. Where is your Rebecca? I saw my grandmother at least once, inquired Ronald. I definitely saw it once, when the mother-in-law came to the city to us, and here my fundamentally we're not going to drag. Outback this. Well, means, and you don't need anything in the outback. Property's deed of gift in equal shares issued to the sons of Stephanie. Stephanie looked at the family in surprise. Sons nodded embarrassedly. Yes, we went with my grandmother to the notary. We didn't want to, but she really asked. Said that the question is important, and that she can only be sure of us, that we are grandpa. They are wrong, we will not allocate, and we will not sell houses. Explained, older on you. She didn't make out, thought, what will you refuse? Grandfather Ronald also categorically refused. They looked hard at Ronald, he smiled back. Stephanie, listening to son's tirade, looked at the blushing brother and suddenly laughed. Well, mother, here you are, well done.